Hello and welcome to Fantasy View, a podcast about reviews for fantasy novels. I'm Jason Hubbard. The subject of my next review is something you might not have heard of. It is called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Oh, but that's if you live in the United States. Yes. I've decided to refer to this book under the UK version of the title, instead of the Sorcerer's Stone, as it's called in the US, and possibly other regions as well. Reason being that a Philosopher's Stone isn't something that was made up just for the book. It's something that's mentioned in stories by crazed alchemists as far back as 300 AD. Just like Pegasus and the Sphinx, it's something from ancient literature that author J.K. Rowling inserted into her Harry Potter series to give her stories an authentic classical element. But some eggheads at Scholastic thought that kids wouldn't want to read about a philosopher, so they changed the name to a Sorcerer's Stone. And who knows, they might have been right. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you just who Harry Potter is, even though you might be young enough for me to tell you just what a toilet is used for. Ever since the first book was published in 1997, it was on a steamroller to success, winning prestigious awards and hitting bestseller lists, which really surprises me to some extent. I mean, I can see the appeal, but I'm sure there were other kids' books that were also very good. I remember this one series called My Teacher is from Outer Space. A silly title, but it was quite imaginative, and it was a pretty good introduction to sci-fi. I first caught wind of the Potter series when I learned in USA Today that the first book was taking America by storm. Actually, I didn't see what the big deal was, and I didn't do any research about the book. I merely assumed, judging purely by the cover illustration, that it was a picture book, the kind you see in every toller's bedroom. And as I saw subsequent titles show up in USA Today, my assumption didn't change. Can you blame me? I was in my early 20s at the time, well past the age when I can have a healthy interest in children's lit. It actually wasn't until I saw the teaser trailer for the first movie when I finally suspected that there was more to Harry Potter than just a series of picture books. Well, I've now read all the books and seen all the movies, as you could probably guess. But can you believe I haven't read the very first one until recently? I tried looking for it in a bookstore once, but couldn't find it, so I shrugged it off. But now I have it on my Kindle. And by the way, to get it on your Kindle, you first have to go to a website called Pottermore. It's a good thing it's not called Potterville, or else the ghost of Jimmy Stewart will rise from his grave and say, "Oh, that damned Potter! Ruining Christmas for everybody!" At first I suspected that Pottermore might be part of some DRM, but it's actually a way you can buy an ebook once and then send it to multiple devices, like a Kindle, a Nook, and a PC. So, this might prove to be incredibly redundant, but I'll give a brief description of the plot. The story starts with three magicians leaving a baby on the doorstep of his uncle and aunt's house. They claim that an evil man had killed the baby's parents, yet the baby had somehow escaped death, and the evil man, oh heck, you know his name is Voldemort, was somehow killed himself on that very night. The baby is, of course, Harry Potter, and he's hardly the first hero in fantasy or otherwise to start off a story as an orphan, but the author does a great job at playing on the sadness in this moment, making the reader feel a little bad for this child who nearly got murdered by a psychotic being. The author could have left the circumstances a mystery until at least the third chapter, but explaining them in the first was probably more effective. And readers should continue to feel bad upon learning that Harry was raised by relatives who treat him like a red-headed stepchild, making him sleep in a little cupboard and not doing a single nice thing for him while they spoil their own son rotten. Harry soon learns that he has magic powers, which he inherited from his parents. His uncle and aunt knew this all along, but they hate anything that they deem not normal, so they pretended that magic didn't exist. But in fact, there's an entire worldwide community of wizards and witches, simply called the Wizarding World. They mostly keep their powers a secret from non-magicians, called muggles, and they live out of sight. Because, according to one character, everyone be wanting magic solutions to their problems. We're best left alone. I'm guessing the Inquisition and numerous witchcraft trials were an added incentive. With the help of the giant Hagrid, Harry starts to attend Hogwarts School of Wizardry and Witchcraft. He makes fast friends with the ginger Ron Weasley, and eventually with the bookish Hermione Granger. He attends classes that have names like Transfigurations, Potions, and Defense Against the Dark Arts. He gets along with most of his professors, except for a fellow named Snape, who seems to have a vendetta against Harry, and Harry begins to suspect that Snape is hatching a sinister plot involving a Philosopher's Stone, which is hidden somewhere in the school. So what is it about this story that made it explode in popularity like a hemorrhoid on my butt cheek? Only without the popularity. Well, ain't that the million-dollar question? I believe it's not just one thing, but many things that come together and work well together. The story has an imaginative world, a likable and sympathetic main character who is active and not just reactive, a colorful cast of supporting characters, and an exciting story of good versus evil. But one key ingredient that's not to be overlooked is the art of misdirection that leads to a big reveal. What do I mean? Well, it's like when Darth Vader says, "No, Luke, I am your daddy." Just think back to when you first saw The Empire Strikes Back. Or if you already had it spoiled for you by then, just imagine when the movie first hit theaters. You learned in the text crawl that Vader is searching for Luke Skywalker, so he sent out a number of probe droids. And you might wonder why this is. Maybe Vader knew that Luke had gotten some training from Obi-Wan. Sure, it wasn't much training, but Vader didn't know that. Plus, there's that whole blowing up the Death Star thing. And since Vader had killed all the Jedi, like 1,000 years ago, he can't abide any new ones being created. So you figure that was all the reason he needed to search for Luke. And once the two meet, they fight, and Vader tries to bring Luke to the dark side, but is unsuccessful. But it turns out that Vader was Luke's daddy, not the one who killed his daddy, thus revealing a very good reason for Vader's obsession with Luke. It's a big reveal that was so effective because no one saw it coming. Vader had plenty of reasons for wanting to see Luke, but it turned out there was one secret reason that beat all. It's a shame that such a big reveal can probably never be used again so effectively. Except, perhaps, in Harry Potter. "Oh, Harry, you look so much like your father, James. But, you look even more like..." Nah, that's just crazy talk. Of course, a really good big reveal is one that makes you think back on all that happened before and see it all in a new light, making you realize that you've just been suckered. And oddly, it's a good feeling. Whoever has seen the movie The Sixth Sense should know just what I'm talking about. It has a big reveal that's so brilliant, the movie's director/writer has been trying to pull off that trick again and again, all to no avail. Maybe he should talk to J.K. Rowling, because she has managed to pull off some pretty effective big reveals in every installment of the Harry Potter series. True, some are better than others. I particularly don't like the one in Part 5. But every installment has some kind of satisfying surprise at the end. Satisfying unless you're an extremely cynical sort who swears that you totally saw it coming. It's these big reveals combined with the other things I mentioned that made readers and viewers keep coming back for more. If there was no big reveal, a book just wouldn't feel like a proper installment. There's also the academic aspect. The whole story, except for the final part, is rather academic in nature, meaning that you learn things in a classroom along with the main character. That may sound boring, except that Harry learns about some really cool things like how to turn a rat into a teacup, how to make things levitate in midair, and how to make a potion that can kill you with just one drop. Sure, it seems a little weird that Hogwarts has no proper class subjects like math and science, but who cares what 1 + 1 equals 2 when you can learn how to decapitate your enemies with just a flick of your magic boomstick? For kids, learning fake lessons about unreal magic is a pleasant diversion from the real lessons that teachers try so hard to shove into their heads. It's almost like attending their own school, but in an alternate dimension where incredible things can be done as long as you say Leviosa instead of Leviosa. For adults, the story can give them a pleasant wave of nostalgia, making them think back on their own school days and how they made friends while shooting spitballs at the teacher behind his back. Sure, there were no lessons on how to teleport yourself from one place to another, but you can remember how the earth seemed to shake on the day your high school sweetheart passed you a note saying, "Hit me, baby, one more time." And now, a few words on the Wizarding World. Even though the story takes place in the late 90s, can you believe DVDs weren't available then? The world that the magic community crafted for themselves is reminiscent of the Middle Ages. Even though so many traditions and styles have come and gone throughout the centuries since then, some rather unlikely ones continued with wizards and witches, such as cone-shaped hats, honest-to-God robes instead of dress uniforms, and riding on broomsticks instead of bikes. I'll admit there's a certain charm to this archaic world that's nestled in a planet of high technology, but sometimes this charm disappears if you think too much on it. I mean, they still ride on broomsticks, just like the witches you see in Halloween decorations. Couldn't anyone come up with a more comfortable design that would replace having a pole slipped in where the sun don't shine? I mean, sure, some of the more modern broomstick designs have handles and footholds on them, but there's still the danger of getting jerked around and having your gender bits slam into a hard piece of wood. I always regarded the writing in the other books to be easy to read and follow. The author's style never quite made you forget that it was a children's book you were reading, yet it never treated the reader as though they were dim-witted and slow to learn. So it was a little of a surprise to me to learn that the Philosopher's Stone has a few hiccups in its writing. For example, one chapter starts with, "As they entered November, the weather turned very cold." I mean, wow. The author didn't even try there. I think most writers would try to be a little more poetic in describing the transition from autumn to winter, but here Rowling just takes the generic route. It seems she firmly kept in mind that it was a children's book she was writing. Either that, or she just wanted to hurry along and get to the plot. There's also a very rushed transition between the end of the first Quidditch match and a scene in Hagrid's hut. Harry catches the golden snitch and raises it above his head. And in the very next paragraph, Harry and his friends are chilling in Hagrid's hut. There is a bit more to it than that, but there's no description of the cheers and jeers from the crowd, other than there being confusion. There's no description of the celebration Harry had with his team and his friends. After reading about an entire Quidditch game, a reader might expect for such a celebration to follow. But the author instead seemed to be in a rush to get the plot moving, as though she was worried about the reader getting bored or something. Speaking of Quidditch, let me say a few things on that. First of all, I want to convey the fact that I am not a sports fan. I don't follow any sports or teams or players of any kind. If you were to ask me for my opinion on, say, Babe Ruth, I'll say, wow, she sounds hot. Despite this, I don't have a problem whatsoever in there being a sport in the Harry Potter universe where players fly around on broomsticks and try to throw a ball through a hoop. I do, however, have a problem with people playing Quidditch in real life, running around with broomsticks between their legs. I wonder if they spare no expense on jockstraps. So while I have no problem with there being a made-up sport, I do think the sport is severely flawed, and it has mostly to do with the golden snitch. In case you don't know, the golden snitch is a small golden ball with wings that flies around the enormous Quidditch playing field, and it's up to a team's seeker to find it and catch it. There are two problems with the snitch. First, a Quidditch match can only end, and I mean only end, when the snitch is caught. That means that Quidditch has no timer, and there are no quarters or periods or whatever. The game ends only when the snitch is caught, and that's that. Harry's team captain, Wood, said there was once a game that lasted for 3 whole days because the snitch wasn't caught for so long. Players had to keep being substituted so the game could go on. Now, I realize this little tidbit is simply a part of the author's sense of humor, and it isn't the only time when she made the wizarding world seem kooky. Still, it's not hard to imagine a game going on for too long because timers don't exist. On the flip side, a game could be far too short, which is exactly what happens in the book's second Quidditch match. Harry is told to catch the snitch as quickly as possible, and so he does, and the game ends after only 5 minutes. 5 minutes! Now, I'm sure House Gryffindor was pleased to see their team win, but I'd be shocked if they weren't a little grumpy too. I mean, people want to be entertained by their sport of choice, which can only happen if a game goes on for a decent length. Hence the existence of timers. But apparently in Quidditch, you may or may not get the worth of the price of a ticket. Secondly, when a seeker catches the snitch, he or she nabs their team 150 points. To put that into perspective, a single goal in Quidditch is worth 10 points, so the snitch is worth 15 goals. And as Wood puts it, the respective seeker's team usually wins because of this. Now, please tell me, does that sound fair? I mean, a team can lose because the other team got 150 points all at once, and they can't make up for it because the game is over. Plus, if a game score is about even when the snitch is caught, the very act of catching the snitch, which is independent of the rest of the action on the field, virtually invalidates the efforts of the other players. And try to imagine this scenario. Imagine a team that works really hard on its teamwork, and they do it practice after practice. In their first game, they manage to get an impressive lead. For a while, it looks like they're going to win. Then the news hits. The other team's seeker has caught the snitch. And even though the team's lead is impressive, it's not quite big enough to overcome the 150 points the other team just scored. All that teamwork, all that practice, down the drain. Because the snitch is worth so bloody much. Yes, I know the snitch has become an icon for the series. And yes, I know it's worth so much because it's so hard to catch. Nonetheless, I think the snitch is a detriment to the game, an unfair element that can invalidate the efforts of most of the team players. The game would be much better off simply by implementing timers. They do have those in the wizarding world, don't they? And if not, then why not? You know, I was wondering what certain other reviewers have said about this book, so I searched in Google, Harry Potter negative reviews. I had a few takeaways from these reviews. First, there's the usual claim that the Harry Potter books entice kids to start worshipping the devil. The reason is simple. You see, magic is often associated with paganism, which is a religion that was almost completely stamped out by early Christians. So generally, magic equals paganism equals devil worship. Not only is this a misconception, I mean, come on, the wizarding world celebrates Christmas, but it's just plain silly. These critics honestly believe that kids will start worshipping Satan so they can cast Expelliarmus, as if one simply must lead to the other. And so, as legend goes, these critics have burned numerous Harry Potter books in a ritual dedicated to the almighty Cthulhu so he can reign for 1,000 years, amen. But seriously, the worst that can happen is that some kid will say, "I want to be a wizard when I grow up, just like Harry." But then they learn that wizard is simply not a real job title, not even computer wizard. And so then he'll say, "Well, I'm gonna be the first wizard in the world ever, and no one can stop me." But then he learns that magic simply doesn't exist, and so all those human sacrifices he just did were all for naught. I'm just kidding. At least, I hope I am. Another common criticism is about the characters. Actually, some people say the characters are three-dimensional, while others say they're one-dimensional. A character being one-dimensional means that they have a very simple and specific personality trait that defines them. You can simply point to a character and say, "Oh, he's the goofy one, and he's the brainy one, and she's the brave one, and she is the one who's bad but not quite evil. Oh no, that one is the evil one." It's kind of like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Leo is the bossy and responsible one. Mike is the goofy party animal. Dawn is the brainy and tech-savvy one. And Raph is the brash and rebellious one. If you ever want to write a Ninja Turtle story, and who doesn't, the dialogue for each turtle must somehow fit within their respective simple personalities. Otherwise, turtle fans will say that your writing is total crap. Even though, let's face it, your characters are utterly one-dimensional, which is the kind of cast of characters a writer usually doesn't want to end up with. And it's true, you can pin many of the Harry Potter characters with simple labels. Hermione is the bookish, brainy one, Ron is the brash yet well-meaning one, and Draco Malfoy is the devil incarnate. Rarely do these characters show other facets of their humanity. Yet, when those rare moments come, it can be pretty fascinating. Whether you believe this criticism has merit or not, it simply doesn't bother me, because of a certain observation I've had about the story. While reading the Harry Potter books, I could usually see the story being played out as a cartoon. Yes, people, I'm saying that this entire series, which has been adapted into 8 live-action movies, seems to me more like a cartoon than anything else. How in the name of Yosemite Sam can I say that? Well, there's the humor, for one thing. The series is known for its quirky humor, the like of which can be seen in Doctor Who, don't you know? Sometimes the humor comes from strange, nonsensical things that you can imagine seeing in a cartoon. For example, when Uncle Vernon nails the mail slot on his front door shut, he uses a slice of a fruitcake to drive the nails in. I think this is a reflection of the author's opinion on how terrible and inedible dried up fruitcake can be, and she just couldn't help but put this image in there. It simply doesn't make sense, though. Why would Uncle Vernon, who works with nails and usually prides himself on how normal he is, simply not use the hammer? It proved to be too silly for the live-action movie, yet it wouldn't be too out of place in a cartoon. Also, advancing ahead a bit, here's an excerpt from part 6 in this series. Quote, "There was a noise like a plunger being withdrawn from a blocked sink, and Ron surfaced." Unquote. This sound effect is used to describe how Ron stops snogging his girlfriend, Lavender. If that's not cartoonish, I don't know what is. And there's that critique about one-dimensional characters. Wouldn't you know it, cartoons have those kind of characters all the time. When's the last time you watched SpongeBob SquarePants? If it was only yesterday, then you need therapy. Also, you might know what I'm talking about. The characters in SpongeBob and so many similar cartoons have characters whose personalities rarely stray from the boundaries that are set for them. That's just how cartoons work. Look, I'm not knocking or belittling the Harry Potter series in saying this. I'm just saying that this grand epic story would lend itself well to a cartoon series. And that wouldn't be so bad. After all, cartoons and geek culture go together like PB&J. And there have been some really good cartoon shows, especially in recent years. Avatar: The Last Airbender was created because Nickelodeon wanted a series that was similar to Harry Potter, and the results were brilliant. There's also Batman and Superman, and Animaniacs, and I suppose SpongeBob as well. I'm telling you, in an alternate universe, the Harry Potter books were adapted into an animated series, and the fans there aren't too worse off than they are here. And if you happen to still disagree with me on how cartoonish the Harry Potter series is, just take a gander at the cover illustrations for the books across various regions. It seems the artists also envisioned the story as a cartoon. It's as plain as day. So I've said some pretty negative things about Harry Potter, yet you can count me as a fan. Because, believe it or not, you can be a fan of a story yet be able to recognize the flaws within it. That's because you don't love something because it's perfect. You love it in spite of its flaws, and you sometimes wish those flaws could be fixed. I think I could continue a bit more about the first Harry Potter book, but I think you've heard my nasally voice for long enough. I'll spare you any further torment. You can show your appreciation by wiring your entire life savings to the following account: 158. Oops, technical difficulties. I'm Jason Hubbard for Fantasy View. Thanks for listening, and please, keep reading.